Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thank you all for watching. In this video, I am going to continue my discussion of Maria Alvarez's 2009 essay, Actions, Thought Experiments, and the Principle of Alternate Possibilities. This is part 2 of my video series on Alvarez's paper. So what I want to do initially is just recap what happened in part 1 of the video series and then move on to part 2. And part 2 involves laying out exactly how Alvarez challenges Harry Frankfurt's effort to refute the principle of alternate possibilities. So let's just recap part 1. There I discussed the principle of alternate possibilities for those who are unclear about what it is. We noted that it's the following claim: an agent is morally responsible for performing an action only if she could have done otherwise. Alvarez argues that there are different ways of interpreting that, and the way she interprets it is in the following way: an agent is morally responsible for performing an action only if she could have refrained from performing the action in which she in fact did. That is to say, she doesn't also have to have the ability to perform some positive action. She just has to have the ability to refrain from doing what she in fact does. And then lastly, in part 1, I discussed Frankfurt's challenge to the principle of alternate possibilities, his main argument. It's an argument by counterexample, where he develops a case he takes to be intuitively clear where we have an agent who is morally responsible for performing an action even though he couldn't have done otherwise. So we're given the famous Jones 4 case. Very briefly, Jones 4 goes in and robs a bank. Why did he rob the bank? Because he decided to on his own to do so. It's what he wanted to do. He robs the bank. Okay? Frankfurt says, let's in addition imagine that had Jones at the last minute decided not to rob the bank, then there's this intervener, a counterfactual intervener, someone who would have come in and forced Jones to rob the bank. So no matter what, Jones has to rob the bank. So it looks like Jones is morally responsible for robbing the bank. Why? Because he did so on the basis of his own internal states, basis of his own beliefs and desires, deliberations, decision-making. But he couldn't have done otherwise. Because in the imagined scenario, again, there's a counterfactual intervener. Frankfurt calls him Black. And Black is going to manipulate Jones to do it. Were Jones to the last minute change his mind. Now we know he doesn't, but that's how the argument is supposed to go. The argument relies on a counterexample, a case like this. Okay, so now let's see if we can understand how Alvarez directly challenges Frankfurt. She does so by thinking carefully about the case that Frankfurt gave us. And what she wants to note is that the only way that the challenge can work is if we understand the counterfactual intervention in a certain kind of way, in a way that perhaps was underspecified in the Frankfurt. Let me read a passage from the Alvarez where she explains what she has in mind here. So big picture before I read the passage, Alvarez is well aware of the fact that what would be needed as a counterexample to the principle of alternate possibilities is a case where an agent is morally responsible for doing what she does, but couldn't have done otherwise. It's just that she wants to argue that Frankfurt didn't succeed in providing us that case. And indeed, any effort to do so is prone to a conceptual mistake. So here's a passage from the Alvarez. So this is on page 67. This is the third full paragraph on page 67, if you're following along. So for a Frankfurt-style case to succeed, as a counterexample, it is necessary that in the counterfactual case, the case that doesn't actually happen, but the case that would have happened, okay, were Jones to have decided at the last minute, last second, not to rob the bank, Black would determine that Jones performs a relevant action. Okay? That is, he must cause Jones to perform an action in such a way that Jones cannot avoid performing it. That's important because we can imagine someone causing another to do something, but in a way that they still could have done otherwise. And so what Alvarez is trying to drive home here is just the idea that the counterexample has to involve a case where, in that counterfactual scenario, the counterfactual intervention makes the case that, in this case Jones, right, is such that he couldn't have done otherwise. So there's two different ways in which the counterfactual intervention can go. So the counterfactual intervener can either intervene in such a way that the agent still could have done otherwise, okay, but in order for the Frankfurt style case to be effective, for it to work, for it to challenge the principle of alternate possibilities, it has to be the case that the counterfactual intervention involves a kind of determination, a kind of manipulation that makes it the case that Jones couldn't have done otherwise. So I'll read that part again. That is, he must cause, the counterfactual intervener is Black, remember? He must cause Jones to perform an action in such a way that Jones cannot avoid performing it. Only if those were the background conditions of Jones' action would it be true that it was not up to Jones which action he performed. And hence only then would we have a successful challenge to the principle of alternate possibilities. Okay, here's the way of thinking about this big picture. Okay, let's take the Jones 4 case. Let's suppose Jones goes in and robs the bank on the basis of his own decision making, and we have the counterfactual intervener. The counterfactual intervener comes in, right, only if, right, the last minute Jones decides not to rob the bank. The counterfactual intervener comes in and forces Jones to rob the bank. Now the intervention here has to be such that, in order to challenge the principle of alternate possibilities, Jones must rob the bank. There's nothing else he could have done. Then we could genuinely say perhaps that Jones is morally responsible for having done what he did, yet could not have done otherwise. Now here's what Alvarez wants to argue. Once we understand a case like this, then it looks like in the counterfactual scenario, Jones is no longer an agent. Jones is no longer performing an action. Once a counterfactual intervener makes someone's action inevitable, argues Alvarez, we've taken away agency from that person, from that agent. So if the counterfactual intervener in the Jones 4 case were able to make it the case that there's nothing else Jones could have done but rob the bank, here's Alvarez, then Jones doesn't rob the bank. Jones does not perform the action of robbing the bank. Why? Because Jones doesn't do anything in that case. His body may do certain things. His body may be put in motion. His limbs may move. Words may come out of his mouth. But that's not the same thing as performing an action. We may have mere behaviors, but we don't have agential actions in these kinds of cases. So once we understand what would be required for a successful Frankfurt-style case, a successful case that challenges the principle of alternate possibilities, we see that any such case is going to lapse into a kind of conceptual confusion. Because once you make it the case that Jones can't but rob the bank, Jones doesn't rob the bank. You might just say that the counterfactual intervener does. The counterfactual intervener uses Jones' body to rob the bank. So it looks like Alvarez can say in response to Frankfurt, look, you've got a conceptual confusion here, because once you make the case as strong as you need it to be in order to succeed in a challenge to the principal alternate possibilities, right, you end up saying something that counts altogether against challenging the principal alternate possibilities, because you need it to be the case in the counterfactual scenario that Jones robs the bank and couldn't have but robbed the bank. But Jones doesn't do anything. Okay, if Alvarez is correct. So that's Alvarez's big picture challenge to the Frankfurt. Conceptual confusion, right? Results when we've strengthened the case enough to satisfy what's necessary for challenging the principal alternate possibilities. So thank you all for watching. If you have any questions about any of this, please let me know, jedickin@syr.edu. Feel free to leave me a comment below, questions below. And keep in mind, keep our healthcare workers in your minds as they deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay. Hashtag HCW shout out. Bye-bye, everybody.